Next up, I'm going to be reading a little bit from a book by John Clark. It is known as Art in the Lives of the Ordinary Roman. It details the usage of art, primarily in ancient Roman cities, and in this particular case, in Pompeii, in a Fullonica, which is well known to be basically a clothing shop or a fullery. Images of work in the workplace, the Fullonica. A Fullonica, or fullery, provided two services: finishing newly woven cloth and cleaning soiled cloth. Although one could use wool cloth immediately after weaving, the processes collectively called fulling were necessary to clean it further, to shrink it, soften it, bleach it white, and give it a nap if desired. The first step was to wash the wool cloth in warm water with a grease cutter such as natron, potash, soapwort root, or urine. For this and other washing processes, fulleries needed large supplies of two liquids, water and urine, both animal and human, and had to make a provision to obtain them. The next step was to rub fuller's earth into the cloth to whiten it and give it luster. After washing the cloth again and beating it, the fullers hang it to dry. Once dry, the fullers brushed the cloth with various kinds of clomes, and then fumigated it with sulfur to bleach it. For this process, they draped the cloth over a wicker frame, the viminia cavea, and at this point, the fullers rubbed the cloth full with fuller's earth again, brushed it to give it a nap, and, if necessary, cropped the fibers to make it smooth. The last step was to press the cloth, after sprinkling it with water. Rather than using heated irons, fullers employed large mechanical presses. Modern understanding of the workings of the Fullonica advanced significantly with the excavation in 1825 of a structure at 6820, which is a Pompeian address book, basically, that we use in modern times. This was just north of the Forum on the Street of Mercury. Both of its unusual architectural features and 4 paintings representing fullers at work provided concrete evidence for the activities that written sources described. The building takes up 1/4 of Insula 8 and is the largest Fullonica found to date at Pompeii. The owner built his establishment into the space of 2 former private houses. Clients would enter through the large vestibule, furnished with a doorkeeper's room. The 3 intercommunicating rooms at the east of the peristyle were reception spaces reserved for customers who dropped off or picked up items, small workrooms occupying the spaces on the peristyle's south side, and at the back are their square washing tubs of different sizes, all furnished with running water. A little staircase gives access to the deepest of the tubs. Room 27 has 6 niches for treading cloth, and room 30 is the largest washing area, perhaps for the final rinsing of the cloth. The only decoration connected specifically with the structure's conversion from house to fullery is the installation of a fountain decorated with paintings between 2 piers on the east side of the peristyle. The paintings date to Pompeii's last 2 decades. Only the paintings on the right-hand pier survive, since the excavator had it removed whole to the Naples Museum shortly after its excavation. As we will see, these paintings are nearly comprehensive in their depiction of how fullers, also known as fullones, processed cloth that came from the looms. However, modern scholars interested in what the paintings revealed about ancient wool processing technology have ignored their original context, using them as illustrations of the fulling process, rather than asking how they might function as an expression of the mentality of the owner and his workers. In its original setting, the Naples Pier formed a part of a fountain installation now reduced to near rubble, since it was left to the mercy of the elements. The other paintings that completed the decorative program have vanished. One contemporary view survives, that completed an engraving made after Sir William Gell's drawing. It shows the fountain, seen from the southwest, a view a worker might have had as he approached the suite full of rooms reserved for clients. Combining Gell's drawings with the contemporary descriptions, it is possible to reconstruct the decorative program. What emerges is the use of images of work that have a very different effect and content from those decorating the front of Veracundus' shop. The fountain itself consisted of a shell-shaped marble basin supported on a fluted column. Both the column and the basin itself have disappeared. To either side of the basin were little spur walls, rising to the height of the basin, that jutted out from the framing piers. The pipes inside them spouted water into the basin. When the water flowed over the edges of the basin, it fell into the peristyle's rain gutter. As only the decorations on an otherwise unadorned peristyle, the fountain, together with the decorated piers and water-spout walls, must have held a certain fascination for both visitors and workers. The artist unified the ensemble in two ways. He provided red ochre, ground for the whole, like the painter of the Lilarium in the house of the Sarno Lilarium, and he painted the whole of the lowest register, or sokol, with a frieze of water plants and birds, punctuated by representations of masks. He also created important symmetries in the decoration of the upper zones. On the south side of the north pier, he painted an image of Venus, represented as a blurry figure in Gell's engraving, but well preserved on the actual pier in Naples. Facing Venus on the north side of the south pier was an image of a water god, a river god, similar, perhaps, to the image of the River Sarno house, poured water from an amphora, a fitting allusion to the waterworks of the fountain beneath him. Venus, although born of the sea, does not appear in any of her watery forms. Instead, she wears a radiant diadem and a red mantle that falls behind her shoulders to reveal her nude body. Images of Venus follow the same late Hellenistic model that appear throughout Pompeii. Here, she is the youthful goddess of love, not the large maternal goddess that we have seen on the shop fronts of Veracundus and of the devotee of Cybele. These were the images on the inner sides of the two piers that faced the fountain itself. On the sides of the piers and spur walls facing east, where clients gathered in rooms, the artist carried through the theme of divine presence and protection. Unfortunately, Gell's engraving does not show us this side of the fountain complex. On the east face of the corner pier, the artist painted two snakes approaching an altar. Boyce includes this painting in his corpus of Pompeian Lilaria, but Froelich rejects this designation because of the other necessary element, a niche, or altar to place offerings on, which is missing. The image of snakes, like those of the gods, is an appeal for protection, for the workers, and for the establishment as a whole. The artist rounded out the cycle of deities by painting images of Dionysus and Apollo on the spur walls jutting out from the piers that carried the water pipes to the fountain basin. The pairing of these two, very different but complementary gods, is as common in contemporary Pompeian decoration as it is in textual sources of the period. So much for standard imagery. For the east and north sides of the right-hand pier, the patron instructed the artist to paint images that, rather than evoking the god's protection over his establishment, showed what his workers, both men and women, did there. A customer would have probably first taken in the charming fountain installation, then her eye would scan the two registers on the pier facing the drop-off and waiting rooms. In the upper painting, reading from left to right, she would first see the image of a woman seated on a stool. She wears a long garment and has a hairnet, a necklace, and a bracelet. Her right arm rests on her thigh, while with her left hand she grasps the edge of a piece of cloth held by a young servant girl. The servant girl wears a simple long tunic and holds an object, perhaps a needle, in her lowered left hand. Scholars have interpreted the seated woman variously, as a proprietor of the fullery, as a cloth checker, or as a customer. Given her small size in relation to the other workers, she is likely to be a worker or a customer, not the proprietor. If she is a customer, a viewer could see herself in this scene, an excellent way to engage and perhaps flatter a client. To the right of this group are two much larger figures of men, both in essentially the same dress, a set of short tunics, and in the same pose, but carrying out very different work. The one on the left leans forward, while turning his head to face the viewer. He is brushing a white tunic with red borders that hang from a bar. The other worker is carrying in the cage-like Fullonica cavia in his hand. He has a pail, probably filled with sulfur, in his left hand and a bundle of cloth over his right shoulder. An owl sits over the fumigating frame, which is a bird sacred to Minerva, protector and patron of all clothworkers. The lower picture arranges 4 workers in apsidal niches, each defined by low projecting walls. The excavator immediately connected this representation with the structures he found in the room at the northwest corner of the peristyle, where the workers tread on the cloth to clean it, while using the niche's side walls for support. All the workers stand in round tubs, but the second figure from the left is at least twice the size of the other 3. A dramatic example of the artist's use of size hierarchy. The 2 workers in the outer niches hold a piece of cloth. The artist depicted their faces in 3/4 view, so that each looks towards the center of the painting. The second worker from the right is a bit taller than the outer figures, but unlike them, he's fat and bald. He stands in a frontal pose and holds a cloth that he has pulled out of his treading basin. A largest figure demonstrates how the cloth treaders used the side walls to support themselves while they worked. He looks out at the viewer and wears the same simple hiked-up tunic as the others. Although some would like to make him the owner of the foolery because of his large size, it is unlikely that the proprietor would want an artist to represent him doing the least glamorous work of the establishment. Nor is it likely that he is an adult, as the others are children, since the second figure from the right is bald. The most likely explanation is the artist, instructed to show 4 different activities, had to double the height of this figure to enable him to rest his arm on the niche walls. And as Fullonica points out, if all 4 fullers had been represented at the same size, the painter would have run out of space. As in many representations of work activities where the artist has no iconographical models, shifts of scale are a common way of allowing him to pack extra information into a scene. In the image just above, he employed this device to show 3 activities: the woman checking the cloth, the man brushing the cloth, and the one carrying the Fullonica cava. There exist 3 other representations of fullers treading cloth in vats, 2 stone reliefs and 1 painting. But this one is intent on recording the particular installation of vats and niches that the fullers used in this shop. More important, the specificity of both the activities of each fuller and the careful depiction of each man's physical traits leaves little doubt that they are the portraits of workers in this Fullonica. The artist continued his story of the Fullonica's activities on the small side of the pier that faced north to the viewer's right. In the upper picture of the right small side, he depicted the cloth press. Although there were no remains of this Fullonica's cloth press, Spinazzola's excavations of the Fullonica Stefani on the Street of Abundance turned up carbonized cloth presses very much like the ones depicted in the painting. Once again, the painter had no traditional models for this image. He had to observe the press that the establishment used in order to reproduce its details. It is a straightforward image, with a minimum of perspective foreshortening. He represented the sturdy framework and the mechanical apparatus. 2 large vertical screws pressed the upper board against the bottom board, where workers placed the cloth. Although the first image we looked at could have been either a cloth checker or a customer, there can be no doubt that it is a customer who appears in the picture beneath this. 2 drying poles suspended above in an oblique perspective hold cloth set out to dry, providing a slightly whimsical setting for the scenes beneath. At the lower left, a woman either receives a cloth from a young man standing in front of her, or gives the cloth to him. 2 details supported as a drop-off scene. The cloth is not carefully folded, and the man receiving it looks out to the viewer, away from the customer. This, then, is the clothing that has seen use and simply needs cleaning, a motif found in a number of grave reliefs or fullers. And once again, The man who looks out at the viewer is one of the fullers, another probable portrait of the Fullonica's personnel. On the right, we see a woman cloth worker, represented at a larger scale than the group on the left. She is cleaning a tool, perhaps a wool comb. The image is an important one, for it furnishes evidence not only for the presence of women workers in this Fullonica, but also the visual representations of such workers. Natalie Campen notes in her study of 2nd and 3rd century reliefs of working women at Ostia that the pattern there is quite different. Artists represent women selling and serving, for example, as shopkeepers or midwives, but never actually performing manual labor. This image of a woman working in cloth production might reflect the owner's pride in his female workers, or it may simply indicate an attitude that welcomed such images in Pompeii at the time. There exists a strong visual parallel in the image of a working Psyche in the fulling scenes in the house of the Vetii. Although a Psyche is a female demigod, not a real woman, such representations of Psyches at work occur frequently in decorative paintings of the period. What did this painting ensemble, and in particular the images of the workers themselves, mean to the people who frequently came to this foolery? The proprietor, the customers, and perhaps most importantly, the workers themselves? Although the cost of the fountain with painting could not have been great, its importance lies in the fact that the owner instructed the artist to depict the activities of his workers. The images of the gods are standard, but the scenes of work were custom-made. The only other decorated spaces in his establishment were the 3 interconnecting rooms reserved for customers. But today, only the mosaic floors remain. Descriptions from time to time of the excavations reveal that the paintings had lofty mythological themes. In room 12, there were 3 center pictures: Theseus, victorious over the Minotaur, Adonis, and Aphrodite, and an uncertain picture that may have shown Theseus leaving Ariadne on Naxos. It is impossible to determine whether these paintings were left over from the house's previous life as a residence, or whether the owner of the Fullonica ordered them to decorate the waiting rooms. Either way, the paintings, along with the original 2nd-style mosaic floor in room 2, gave these reception or waiting rooms a semblance of high culture, even as they provided a refuge amidst the noise and the stench of the foolery. Those waiting were either the customers themselves or their slaves. But the proprietor, it seems, also wanted to show his pride, not only in his establishment but also his workers. If he instructed the painter to make into portraits the vignettes of workers treading cloth, the man accepting dirty laundry, and the woman cleaning her tool, as I believe he did, then he just wanted to show that not just his employees did, but also what they looked like. He wished to put a face, as it were, on his little industrial operation. For the customer, the surprise of matching a worker's face in the fresco with the person he or she was dealing with must have been a pleasant one. It was also, one could argue, a good way for the owner to sweeten his workers as well. Seeing themselves at work, and in company of the gods and goddesses of the fountain, would have reinforced their pride in their work, and perhaps their loyalty to their boss. The owner, unlike the self-proclaiming Verecundus, is absent from these scenes. If the workers were slaves, the paintings exhibited the skills that would perhaps earn them enough money to buy their freedom one day. The fountain complex, in all its specificity, had little in common with the generic decorations that graced many workspaces in Pompeii. Almost nothing in common with the work scenes transformed into the never-neverland of Cupids and Psyches, like those in the house of the Vetii. Right there for all to see, owner, customers, and workers, was a series of images celebrating the workers and the machinery of their establishment. For each viewer, the painting's message was slightly different, depending on his or her status and his or her relation to the business of the foolery. Yet for all viewers, the images of the workers and their tools celebrate and, in a sense, elevate everyday life and the ordinary people who worked in the foolery.